healed over and over and over. And he didn't heal everybody physically. I've had people say to me that I've worked with, Pastor, I've prayed for physical healing. God didn't do it. What's up? That's very American for saying, why? Why didn't he? And I don't always have an answer for that. But I know that sometimes when he doesn't heal me physically when I'm asking for it, it's because during that physical thing I'm struggling with, he's healing me in other ways. What I know is that he not only can heal anything and anyone, but he desires to. And that's what I think is the message I carry everywhere I go. Not enough people, like the story of the child who said God is still the same God. Not enough people understand all those healings that he did in the New Testament, he still desires to do today. He desires to heal, even if he doesn't always heal us the way we ask. And so mentally is the other one. And so he desires to heal us physically, emotionally, spiritually, mentally. And I'll tell you, when I was younger, I needed profound healing in all of those areas. I turned to Jesus, and he did absolutely miraculous, and I'm not using that word in an exaggerated way. He literally did miraculous things within me. Some things were immediate, some healings were right away. Some things took place over time throughout my relationship with him, because he calls us first and foremost to relationship with him. And then as we grow in our relationship with him, some other things heal through that relationship. And so let me start with my own story. Mine is a story of growing up in an alcoholic home where both my parents were severely addicted to alcohol, and one was also battling clinical depression and 2 other clinical mental illnesses as well. It was chaos. It's a story of having experienced trauma and pain and complete family dysfunction from the very day I was born. I wasn't supposed to live. This was back in 1963, that's when I was born. I weighed 3 pounds when I was born. My lungs were filled with fluid, and I had a very slim chance of surviving. So slim that the doctors told my parents that all they could do was put me in a crib and hope for the best, and that they should make funeral arrangements for their infant. And so my parents did. They bought a tiny casket and they made funeral preparations amidst a hospital staff that didn't seem to care very much about their dying infant. They were so confused. Why doesn't this hospital staff seem to care about our dying baby? But you see, if you know American history, you know that in 1963, the President of the United States at that time was shot. He was assassinated. My mother was in labor with me when President John F. Kennedy was assassinated. And by the time I was born, the entire nation was shocked and grieving, and I was the deathly sick newborn left to fend for herself and fight to live or die. It was that simple. They put me in a crib. The whole staff is watching on television everything that's happening with the president that had just been assassinated. And there I was. And so when I tell my story, I say, as it was from the beginning, so went my life for the first 22 years. From birth through age 22, when I moved out of my parents' home forever, my life was one traumatic moment after another. One or the other parent was always drunk each night. Sometimes both were. Most nights, one or the other parent passed out in a drunken stupor somewhere in the house, and often remained in the spot where they fell until early morning. Every day, and especially every night, I experienced the typical alcoholic home events. At least in America, this is very typical of alcoholic homes. Screaming, yelling, slurred insults and berating, physical violence, emotional and sexual abuses, depression, confusion, a complete lack of any sense of safety and security in life, and a total lack of understanding of love, boundaries, and normalcy in life. And because of the effect of these things on me at home, I also went to school and suffered harsh bullying. from kindergarten through my second year in high school. After that time, I became a big enough and a strong enough athlete that most kids thought twice about bullying me by then. But before that time, my story is one of nearly intolerable levels of pain and suffering. But it doesn't end there. It's also a story of God's incredible faithfulness, his incredible healing powers, and his amazing love. I call my own story a story of beauty to ashes. No, that's not right. Tell me. Beauty from ashes. All right, so we're going to look at that. Isaiah 61, if you have a Bible with you. If you don't, that's okay. Every time I tell my story, I always think, am I going to say beauty for ashes? Beauty from ashes? Anyway, you know, beauty from ashes. So Isaiah 61, starting at verse 1, says this. The Spirit of the Sovereign Lord is on me, because the Lord has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim freedom for the captives, and release from darkness for the prisoners, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor and the day of vengeance of our God, to comfort all who mourn, and provide for those who grieve in Zion, to bestow on them a crown of beauty instead of ashes, and the oil of joy instead of mourning, and a garment of praise instead of a spirit of despair. They will be called oaks of righteousness, a planting of the Lord for the display of his splendor. And so that passage is a life passage for me. I live that because the Lord took all of those abuses and awful experiences from my childhood and from my adolescence, and he flipped them into gifting for ministry, gifting to reach others, giftings to help those who now suffer some of the things I went through. When I went away to college, I experienced some freedom because I was no longer living at home. I went away at age 17 to college. And that was new life for me, but I was struggling with depression, clinical depression. The pain had taken a huge toll on my life. And so every day I was fighting simply to choose life through the darkness of depression. And then one night when I went home, my father, who was very, very drunk, I was home for the weekend, and my father again had gotten very, very drunk and almost, in a fit of drunken anger, almost crushed my skull with an alcohol bottle. He was so angry, he swung a 1-gallon bottle, missed my head, grazed my hair, just went past my hair. He missed my head only because he was so drunk. And so I ran to my car and I drove the 45 minutes back to college that night. And I was trembling and crying and very, very shaken. This was my father. And so when I got back to school, I went up to a friend's dorm for comfort, for friendship. And it was the room of one of our men's basketball players who I'd been friends with for a couple of years. And when I went to his room and I explained what had happened, he brought me into his room with more care and compassion in his voice than I'd ever heard. And then he locked the door behind me and raped me. And so that was at such a point, that was the darkest point of my life, because I had survived and survived and survived, and I had been sexually assaulted in high school by a boy, but I was able to fight him off because I was a strong athlete by that time, but college men were stronger. And so I went back to my dorm room that night. I was hurt and I was dazed, and that was a turning point in my life, because I remember thinking, am I going to choose life, or am I going to end my life? I was at that point. And as the pain had always done in my life, it pushed me to fight to live. I chose to fight to live. It pushed me to excel. In college, I found my place in the world. I moved on. I tell people that I refused. I made a conscious decision not to let one college athlete's inability to control himself and show true compassion. I refused to let that wreck my life. And so I went on to be a straight A student and on the homecoming court and an All-American athlete and other things. And so in college is where my life became something more than it had ever been. Things began to come together for me. But amidst the awards, and amidst the homecoming court, and amidst the straight A's, nobody knew that I was dying inside. And that is a point that the Lord allowed me to get to, I believe, because I think there are so many people walking through our world today in all nations who look a certain way on the outside, and they're dying inside because they don't know Jesus, the healer, the Savior, the one who can flip pain into gifting, the one who can turn ashes into beauty. In my life, nobody knew that I was dying except God. God knew. And one day, out of the blue, I was not even looking for him. I didn't know who God was. At that time in my life, at 19 years old, I didn't even know the difference between God the Father, Jesus the Son, the Holy Spirit. I didn't even know if they were all God. I didn't know what the Spirit was. I didn't know who Jesus was. I didn't know anything. I knew nothing. But God knew me. And he burst into my life out of the blue one day, so powerfully and so beautifully and so profoundly that I gave my whole life to him in that moment. I didn't even know who it was. I knew it was God, but I didn't even know what that meant. But he was love. He was love, pure love right there, telling me that he loved me. And so I fell in love right back. And I entered a Catholic convent after college. I became a nun. And like all Catholic nuns, I made a vow to marry God alone. That's what Catholic nuns do. I was absolutely in love with God, and I wanted only him for my spouse. And it's still so today. I left convent life a few years later, and I renewed my vows to God in a Catholic Mass as a Catholic laywoman because I still felt called to belong to him alone. I knew it would be an unusual and sometimes misunderstood journey, and I was okay with that. I was, and I still am, as in love with God as any woman can be with any man. And so through a series of many events, and for a number of reasons, I ended up leaving the Catholic Church, basically because God called me to be a pastor in the Church of the Nazarene. And if you're familiar with Catholicism, you know that only men can be priests in that denomination. But God wanted me to be a pastor. And so here I am. And if you think being married to the Lord is an unusual calling in Catholicism that has priests and nuns, you should try traveling around the world being married to God and telling Protestants that. They don't always get it. And I am one now, and I love it. So I always have to explain the nun background, and then a lot of people get it. So, I'm 55 now, and my whole life belongs to God. I will do anything he asks of me, anytime, anywhere, any way he asks me to. He healed everything about me, everything, and that's why I worship. I was on the edge of, not on the edge, I was lost in a couple of different mental illnesses myself. I inherited that through DNA, through behavior, I don't know, doesn't matter. But literally, I was in a psychiatric unit for a while, struggling to understand reality, struggling to make my mind work, struggling to figure out how to break out of the blackness of depression and the brokenness of my brain. And God healed it all, like sovereignly. He just moved and healed me back then. And then began to teach me and mold me and shape me for the work that I do now, which is all kinds of things, but I especially reach out to those who are lost or hurting or broken or who have suffered through abuse or trauma or loss or grief or any number of other things that scare normal people. You know, a lot of people out there get afraid. We get afraid sometimes when someone's really hurting or someone's really broken or someone's behaving in ways that are scary. And I go when the Lord sends me. I don't go on my own. So, you may not have the kind of past hurts or pains that I've had. I hope not. but you all have your own. We all have our own things that we struggle with, our own things where we say, where are you in this, Lord? And so I always tell people, no matter how put together they look, and you guys look pretty put together. You guys look pretty okay. But we all have something where we're saying, Lord, coming to this place where I'm hurting, or this place where I don't understand, or this thing within me that haunts me, or whatever it is. We all have something. And so I travel to remind people that we have a God of miraculous healing, a God of incomparable love, a God who stays, a God who never, ever, ever leaves us. And that's why I worship. So I hope you'll join me in a few songs tonight. They are probably all going to be new to you. None of them are complicated though, except the last one. It's not complicated musically, but I went to Haiti and did some things there and was very, very, very moved by the last song we're going to do tonight. And you'll understand when I explain it to you. So it's in Creole. Do you feel like singing in another language tonight? You don't have to memorize it. The words will be up there. So let me just get my throat wet, and then we'll sing a little bit.